my world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am what I am.
Good afternoon and welcome to Dublin City FM. You're listening to LGBTQlife with myself, Mick Fitzgerald, and today we've got a very special programme for you because we've got a very special guest with me in the studio. But before we do, I just wanted to say thank you and congratulations to Daniel HT. Over the weekend, Daniel was installed as the 2018 Mr. Bear Ireland. He's taking over from Owen from last year, and I've seen a photograph of Daniel. He certainly will not disappoint either fans of bears or even fans of good-looking men. The other one I want to say, congratulations to Glen Quigley. I spoke to Glen over the weekend. Glen is also a member of the bear fraternity or community. And Glen has just published his first novel called The Moth and Moon. And that's available either through Amazon or online. We'll come back to that one. But as I mentioned, today we've got a very special programme for you because joining me in the studio is a man I am calling an LGBT living treasure. Not an icon, but a living treasure because he's still with us and has a lot to offer. That's our good friend Tonie Walsh. So,
Thanks
Tony,
very much, Mick. That's the first time I've been called a living treasure.
Well, we're still living, which is really the important side of it. But if I could start off, Tony. Just less than a year ago, you and I, we were at the launch of, the 30th anniversary of Gay Community News. And a lot of friends there, a lot of people we know. But first of all, Lisa came on and she said some nice things about the publication and the people she worked with. And then Brian, the editor, came along and, he was very, as I say, supportive as well. And then you came on and you were a force of nature. And I thought, that's my kind of man, he's still maintaining the rage. Where do you get the energy from, Tony?
Well, I have to say, in terms of maintaining the rage, I look to some of my icons and personal heroes like Alva Smith, who's head of the Repeal campaign. And she was also coincidentally my tutor back in French class, and something she doesn't want to be reminded of. My French tutor back in UCD in the late 70s, and of course we both share in common. Having been, we were both chair of the National LGBT Federation at one point, and I look at her, she's 71. And
she doesn't look it, does she?
No, not only does she look it, she doesn't sound it, and I think that's the sort of person I want to be as I sail towards the crevasse.
Yeah.
But I do think, one of the things I think that gives us relevancy when we pass middle age is to be smart about how we contain our anger and modulate our anger and our righteous indignation at social injustice or things we want to improve in Irish society.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting one that you should say that because what I saw was somebody who was very much of the moment, but also was tapping into the tradition as well. And let's be honest, the LGBT tradition, we're going to have the 50th anniversary of Stonewall this year. It came out of a rage, didn't it?
It did indeed, and there's still unfinished business. I also like surrounding myself not only with like-minded friends and my peers in terms of age, but also tapping into the enthusiasm and energy of a young community who actually know nothing, have no memory, because they weren't alive, have no memory of what it was like to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender back in the 70s or 80s when I came out. I mean, when I came out in 1979, I was 19. The gay civil rights movement was only 5 years old. It was in its infancy and it was full of a sort of dynamic fervour. And sometimes I still feel that now amongst some of the kids, without being disparaging towards them. But the baby gays, the baby lesbians and baby gays, I still feel some of that because we do have unfinished business. We're still talking about finishing what was started in 1916 and 1922, building a new republic. Building a new republic for all of us, not just those of us who are queer.
It's an interesting one you should say that because something that changed my focus on this was about 10 years ago. I was covering Pride for another radio station, and we had one of those vans where you blast out sounds and all of that. And it was the last year at the back of the Civic Centre. And when we were crossing the road, there were two young gay men, and they were just talking amongst each other. And one was saying to the other, I mean, they couldn't be more than 20 at the very most. One said to the other, he said, "Why do we have Pride? It's just another party."
Don't get me started on this.
And exactly, and I had to say to them, back in the day, but people were being locked up just for being gay. People were beaten up for being gay. People were discriminated against, and they were hearing this for the first time. And I thought that is a message that we have to consolidate and get to that next generation, because you and I would have understood it perfectly. But
well, look, there's a whole range. We could spend all afternoon talking about ways in which we need to advance and accommodate the desires and needs of marginalised communities, marginalised sexual communities like LGBT people, and others as well. Other communities not necessarily sexual. We could be here all day nitpicking at things that still need to be done. I mean, we can. I think there's a lazy shorthand amongst many people in civil society and even in government. Especially after marriage equality, there's this lazy shorthand that says everything has been done, all the achievements have been made, simply because people are only looking through life through the prism of legal reform, law reform, and they're looking at social inclusion and diversity through the prism of law reform. And you know what? Yes, indeed, we have an amazing Gender Recognition Act, which we're now tinkering with again to amend. We've got sexual offences legislation in place. We've got equality legislation in place, we've anti-discrimination legislation in place, but that doesn't mean that society has come the distance in terms of embracing the needs and concerns of its sexual minorities. There's still business to be done, and that is why, as far as I'm concerned, there still needs to be an element of protest in something like Dublin Pride Parade. I was incandescent with anger last year walking on the Pride Parade through streets of Dublin where nobody was on the sidewalks. Dublin City Council had as far as I'm concerned, Dublin City Council had bullied the Dublin Pride organisation into taking an alternative route through side streets of the city, and it entirely the whole process. Although I was happy with the party in Smithfield Square, and I think it actually showed what Smithfield Square is capable and possible of, because it's actually, often it seems like an afterthought, that public space. But the parade itself, the route through Kevin Street and Patrick Street, there was hardly anyone on the streets. Now, the whole idea is, I mean, people need to understand, Dublin City Council needs to understand that Pride was born, not only born out of protest, it was born about a need to be visible, to present positive images, positive LGBT images, to celebrate our unique queer identity and our unique queer worldview with the rest of Dublin City and the rest of Ireland. And if we don't get that opportunity, then as far as I'm concerned, it completely invalidates Dublin Pride.
Sure. Do you think that...
But the Pride Parade itself.
Yes, no, because I agree. I mean, when I started originally covering it, it was quite a small event, and it was a very much how would I put it? It was a focused event, and I still remember one. It must have been about 10, 12 years ago. We were walking along O'Connell Street, and there were police there with dogs, and I thought, who are you trying to protect? Are you trying to protect the marches of the public? And it was bizarre.
Just touching on that and talking about the dogs, myself and Senator Fintan Warfield, who's been a champion of the lowering the age to vote, as we saw recently, and also putting forward amendments to the Gender Recognition Bill, and he's a very good personal friend of mine. Senator Fintan Warfield and I were doing some political media work in Poznan, Poland last year for their 5th Pride Parade. And there was a phalanx of heavily militarised armed police with dogs and truncheons and anti-flak gear that actually frightened me. And I was wondering, who are they trying to protect us from? Are they trying? But here's the thing: it strikes me, just mentioning one of the reasons I really wanted to mention Poznan Pride. even if we just bringing back to trying to validate Dublin Pride parades and the reason for having 50,000 of us with fabulous floats and the corporate section and everything buying into it on a parade, and asking ourselves what are the reasons for continuing this tradition, the visibility and everything, even if it's a case that we have actually advanced ourselves in Ireland to a new and fabulous dispensation where it's cool and okay for same-sex couples to walk down the street without fear of being harassed and abused and everything else, and we're all down with it, and inclusion has happened, which it more or less has. That doesn't mean that we actually shouldn't be using our events here as a pivot to make noise about what's happening abroad and what's happening with our Eastern European brothers and sisters. Absolutely. Who are living in extraordinarily repressed and oppressed circumstances.
Yes, it's been pointed out to me, and it's quite interesting, is that two Catholic countries that have a lot of migrants in Ireland are Poland and Brazil. A lot of Brazilian gay people, no problem about it. They're very much visible. They're there, and they're very happy to, if you like, celebrate their sexuality. Pole's quite different, and I suspect that might be a cultural constraint. Do you think we have a role there to, as I say, to help those people become?
We absolutely have a role, and if you can imagine how much our role is part of a tradition that was also born previously by other more socially developed countries like Germany and the Nordic countries and the Netherlands. I'll give you an example of how this plays out. Back in 1980, the Dutch Foreign Affairs Minister stood up in the Dutch government and critiqued the Irish government, which was a Fianna Fáil government at the time, for not advancing the rights, both the civil and legal rights of Ireland's lesbians and gay men at the time. And Noel Davern, a Fianna Fáil TD, stood up, apoplectic with rage, in the Dáil chamber and gave out about the Dutch government actually interfering in the rights of a sovereign state. Now here's the thing, we've moved on to a point in terms of our European Union membership where we've embraced notions of shared sovereignty, but we also, I think, in terms of things like subsidiarity, we realise through our European Union membership, and also because we've advanced to this point where we have essentially society is built on a set of social democratic principles, we understand we have a right to actually, if not so much actively intervene, but to be part of conversations where we can bring our other member states, where we see people in other countries, especially as more recent members of the European Union, the Eastern European Union countries that have come out of the trauma of the end of the Soviet Union and all that, where at the moment there's been a resurgence in a very particular type of conservative religiosity that's actually underpinning very conservative political values, and it's leading to people actually, we're hearing horror stories from the Baltic countries, and pride parades in Latvia and Lithuania within the last couple of years, where people were actually attacked by alt-right thugs, and the police just stood by and allowed it to happen. And I think we absolutely, in Ireland, we have, in a sense, we've climbed up the ladder. We've climbed up the ladder of civil rights and success here and social democracy, and it is absolutely our responsibility and duty to reach out the hand to other people who are in more repressed situations than we are.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, you should say that, Tonie, and I'm not trying to beat a drum for the Labour Party, but I remember at the time of marriage equality in 2015, Eamon Gilmore, who has probably not been given the credit for marriage equality that he deserves, he made a point of saying, we've now reached a point and it is our obligation to how can I put it, support the extension of these rights to places like you're talking about, and ultimately to the third world, which is again a different situation. Do you think we've dropped that ball? Or
at times it seems like we have. I mean, I suppose occasionally we've come out of a decade of austerity, and all that entailed. And I think once we slough off the worst success of that and reorganise ourselves here and deal with some urgent, pressing problems, immediate problems in our midst, I think, yes, it gives us the space. We can then actually look around us and see who needs our help. And, you know, people... again, just bringing back to the Poland example last year, I had Polish people who look up to Ireland. They look up to the Irish LGBT civil rights movement. They look up to the government in its entirety for what it has achieved. They see enormous cultural comparisons in terms of a country that was colonially oppressed, dragged itself out of an almost feudalistic, conservative history, managed to slough off the worst extremes of a very moribund Roman Catholic ideology, and we've picked ourselves up by the boots and moved on, it's no surprise that there are other countries near us who are looking at us with envy and going, look, how did they achieve that actually, and how did they achieve it within 2 generations?
Yeah. I take your point.
I'm not sure if I'm quite answering your question.
I'm very much, as I say, on the same page with you on this one. But I also happen to think you don't have to look very far in this country to find discrimination. You just have to go up the road. And then we've got this so-called Brexit border or non-Brexit border. Sure. But the reality is that if you're LGBT, there is a border in Ireland in that sense of the word. Yes, you can go to Dundalk and get married, or you can go to Sligo and get married. But if you live in Lisbon, you want to get married in Lisbon. You want to get married in Derry. You want to get married in Belfast. And should we?
Oh my God! You're opening up a hornet's nest when it comes to how those of us in the Republic should accommodate and embrace our brothers and sisters north of the border. Because I actually think historically we have run away from our responsibilities. Those of us down south. I mean, making a sweeping generalisation here, obviously there are political parties and there are individuals and organisations that have always embraced the needs and concerns and fears of people living in the 6 counties. But I have a theory, okay, this is my theory, that the Troubles reminded us down south of everything we left, the trauma we left behind of partition and the Civil War and everything. And we wanted to run as far away from that as possible. And how that played out was, I'll give you an example. I read a statistic some time ago that 2/3 of the population of the 26 counties had never been across the border. Yeah. Now, if the majority of people down south have never been across the border, then it's impossible for us to get a sense of, to get any idea of what, first of all, what people have lived through the last 30 years. The fact that they've got the highest per capita rate of mental health problems in Western Europe. It's no surprise. They've got a dysfunctional business community. There's a whole raft of problems there. There are the immediate ones from an LGBT perspective of the unavailability of marriage, of abortion. People's rights aren't taken seriously enough and accommodated enough. And I think we should be engaged with all of that. We should be more actively engaged. And there were some good soundings from our Taoiseach at the Dublin Pride rally in Smithfield last year in terms of throwing an eye at what was happening up north, and he came out with that wonderful statement reminding people that the north would never be left behind by the government of the south. But there's a huge amount of unfinished business, and I don't think it should just simply be the job of government to advance those concerns. We all have a duty. People should actually be taking it upon themselves to go and explore the north. This is some of the most beautiful scenery in the country for a start. Sure. But to see how people are living, and to see how we can engage in conversations and bring people forward, even bring people who are adamant in their opposition, hardline religious nuts and everything. Because I think, it's possible, maybe I'm being overly optimistic here, but I think it's possible to chip away at some of that sectarianism and homophobia. Sure.
Yeah. I want to put something to you, Tony, and now this is rumour, but it's coming from very reliable sources at the time. When the last outing of the Let's Put Stormont Together collapsed a couple of weeks ago, or about 6 weeks ago, I was getting reports coming out of Belfast. Now, I will say these are not provisional Sinn Féin, but the other Sinn Féin that were the sources of them. And what they were saying is that Sinn Féin were prepared to back down on marriage equality if they got an Irish Language Act. The other sources, as we say, were saying, oh, well, it's Gaels before gays. If that turned out to be true, how would you feel?
Well, of course, this is all hypothesis.
It's hypothesis, I appreciate
and hearsay. So I can't speculate on what my reaction would be if that actually played out in the way that you're suggesting. But here's the thing: I think Sinn Féin, North and South, have signed up to parity of esteem when it comes to language. And they've signed up to parity of esteem when it comes to marriage rights. So I can't see them actually just playing one off against the other.
No, I'm prepared to give them the saving grace that they have a fiendish plot, and the fiendish plot is that a Labour minister, a Labour backbencher, introduces a private member's bill which the Tories will support. If that's the backdoor way of doing it, I could live with that. So
yeah, I mean, who knows? It's all to play for the way Brexit is unfolding.
Well, this is exactly, isn't it? I mean, we've got a very strange situation. But if I can come back to the personal, Tony, because you were saying you went to UCD in 1979. Now, I finished in UCD in 1972, so that'll show you the age. But when I was there,
you're not looking at it at all.
But there was no LGBT society. There was no LGBT society in Trinity, even though a great Fianna Fáil insult to anybody was he's a Trinity queer. that was one of the insults of the day. Something I'd like to get your view on, because I think it's very poignant in this at this time, is I lived in London pretty much through the 70s, and then I went to Australia, and London had a gay scene, and then I went to Australia, and it was probably about the late 80s before what we saw was the evolution of a gay scene to a gay community. Were you conscious of that, as we say, that transition?
That's a really interesting distinction you're making here, and I think sometimes it's often forgotten by people when they try, and when people ask themselves how accommodating and how accommodating and how accepting is a society and a community of its sexual minorities, and people can often sort of imagine that just because you have a flourishing commercial scene that somehow it's all fine and dandy for people, and it's not quite the same thing. Excuse me. I remember in Dublin the first beginnings of a commercial scene in the early 80s, and what I mean by that is, I mean, there were always drinking halls and hotels and places that were gay friendly, although they rarely, as you well know, they would rarely come out and say that. I mean, when the first gay bars, I'm saying this in inverted commas, that I went to, in fact it was the first place I heard Donna Summer booming out of a speaker in 1979, Bartley Dund is on the site of
Break for the Border.
Break for the Border on Stephen Street Lower in Dublin, and I remember the two guys. You know, the clientele was whatever 90% gay men and women, and but when push came to shove, and the owners were ever put on the spot and asked to acknowledge their clientele and the identity of the bar, they just went into blanket denial about it. But they were prepared to take the pink punts, but then it just and it shows you something about the oppressive nature of Irish society at the time, and even the internalized homophobia that informed the attitudes of people. But I see. You saw the development of a commercial scene. We've never had a hugely embedded commercial scene, commercial infrastructure, social infrastructure in the way that other countries have had. And I think some of that has had to do with critical mass and density of the city and everything else. But also I think maybe this has done us some favours. I think historically the gay and lesbian civil rights movement here have just gone about the process of liberation. In a very different way. I mean, I look at the Hirschfeld Centre that I was very involved with. It was one of the earliest of its kind in the world. It ran from 1979 to 1987 when it was then burnt out. Excuse me. The Hirschfeld Centre provided a range of social and cultural services that was always about subtly politicising people and getting people ready for the inevitability of law reform, but more importantly, getting people ready for what lay beyond law reform, because I think it was really important back in the 80s that people had a sense of, I call it the liberation of one's imagination, the liberation of possibility. You know that law reform happened in 1993. We're coming up to celebrate its anniversary during Pride Week this year. But you know, when Mary Robinson signed into law the Sexual Offences Act of 1993, didn't particularly change life for gay men. No. You know, we went about our lives. One day we were criminals, the next day we weren't. But what it did altar was it signalled a new attitude in Irish society, and I think for the first time it allowed actually Irish society to really acknowledge our existence and to sort of embrace our concerns and everything. But I'm never too particularly worried about the extent of a commercial scene in Ireland. I don't think that's how we sort of validate our existence.
Yeah. It would be inappropriate to be in this neighbourhood and not discuss the subject, but we're just down the road from Fairview Park. Now, I know from your writings and your postings on social media that this is a very, very important and significant issue to you. I wasn't living here in 1983 or 84 when Declan Flynn was murdered. How important was that event in particularly galvanising what was a nascent community at the time?
Well, here's the thing. Declan Flynn, for anyone who doesn't know who we're talking about,
Sure.
was an area into trolley handler who was savagely beaten to death in Fairview Park in late 1982, left to choke in his own blood, and when his killers, who were all from the North Inner City, came to trial, they were let off with suspended manslaughter sentences. Declan Flynn's case, murder, was not unique.
No.
Gay men were being brutal, and I think it's important that we recognise that throughout the 70s and 80s, gay men of various ages were being harassed, beaten up and murdered with impunity, and there was, in the absence of anti-discrimination legislation and in the absence of a recognition of gay hate crimes and in the context of a community that was very distrustful of the Gardaí and vice versa, there was rarely any satisfactory conclusions to gay murders. But Declan Flynn's case galvanised people, and for the first time ever it led to the largest public demonstration, which was it was called the March to Stop Violence Against Gays and Women, and it really had a transformative effect. I mean, some people talk about it as Ireland's Stonewall, but what it did was, first of all, it focused Irish society and government on our real concerns. The fact that people were being murdered and nothing was done about it, and also the effect of the court case was to say that a gay man's life had no value.
Well, it's an interesting one. Did people suddenly come to the realisation that could have been me?
Absolutely. I mean, it's anyone who's following the Fairview Park papers in 1983, as I call them, on social media, and they'll be continuing throughout April. There's an extraordinary, I mean, I have 300 pages of press reportage, and there was TV and radio documentaries done as well. Irish society and government was actually horrified and appalled by both the murder and the court's decision. And I think for the first time ever, you saw Irish society, even though we were still living as criminals, gay men were still living as criminals, and we had no protection in law. LGBT people had zero protection in law. But I think it was the really first fundamental engagement by Irish society in the concerns and fears of the community at the time.
Tonie, we're going to unfortunately run out of time, but I want you to just mention the Irish Queer Archive. You're the independent curator. First of all, what are they and how can people, shall we say, access them?
Yeah, the Irish Queer Archive is the main historical repository for LGBT information in Ireland. It's now being held in the National Library of Ireland in Kildare Street. Only a tiny amount of it has actually been made, has been catalogued and made public, because simply the National Library of Ireland just don't have the money and resources. But you can go online, and if you go and look for Irish Queer Archive, IQA, or List 151, you can actually see everything that they've catalogued. There's some amazing material there. And I'd actually, I think we should be waving a flag for the Irish Queer Archive in terms of encouraging the National Library of Ireland to exploit this resource.
Well, I was going to say to you, and this could be a piece of synergy, all those big commercial companies that have huge floats in Pride, perhaps if you were to take 10% of that and give it to the Irish Queer Archive, you'd be doing a really good service, and a lot better service than just having a big truck going down Kevin Street.
That's the most fabulous suggestion I've heard in years.
Yeah.
Wonderful, and thanks for planting it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're going to run out of time. I want to say thank you to Aisling for doing such a fabulous job. I want to say to Tonie, we've only scraped the surface. This is only the away leg. We'll have to get you back again. But
Thanks
Tonie
for having
Walsh,
me
it's
in.
been a pleasure to have you here today.
World that I want to have a little pride in, my world, and it's it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am.